Richard drew the truth or dare task of kissing the opposite sex you like passionately for 2 minutes. Amid the jeers of his friends, he stood up and walked towards me. At that time, we were in the middle of a Cold War. I was nervous and shy, and closed my eyes in bewilderment. However, Richard just sneered beside my ear, "Do you want me to kiss you, Joanne? Too bad. I'm already sick of it." After saying that, he turned around and kissed a beautiful junior schoolmate. At that moment, I suddenly didn't want him anymore. The next day, I applied to a foreign school and accepted the marriage arrangement made by my elders. On his birthday, I flew to a foreign country without looking back. When the plane landed, my mobile phone was bombarded with calls from him. When Richard drew the truth or dare task, he was already a bit tipsy. The meddlesome friends picked up the slip of paper and deliberately read it out loud. Kiss the opposite sex you like passionately for 2 minutes. Everyone immediately looked at me and started to jeer. Tonight's gathering was specially arranged by Richard. I had been in a Cold War with him for over a month. In the past few times, it was always me who swallowed my grievances and took the initiative to make up. But this time, I don't know why I got so stubborn. I just refused to give in. Originally, I thought the stalemate would continue. I was a bit nervous, and my fingers subconsciously clenched the hem of my dress tightly. And Richard had already stood up. Several familiar girls beside me all smiled and gently pushed me. "Joanne, your boyfriend is coming to kiss you." A glimmer of joy welled up in my heart, and I looked up at Richard. He was wearing the white shirt that I liked, and the collar was a bit messy. Under the haze of alcohol, his eyes looking at me seemed especially amorous. My cheeks flushed, and I lowered my eyes, clenching my fingers even tighter. My palms were already sweating profusely. When I looked up again, Richard had already walked in front of me. "Joanne." Richard bent down. His voice tinged with drunkenness sounded extremely gentle. I was so nervous that I didn't know what to do, and I was too shy to control myself. When he was about to kiss me, I closed my eyes in a fluster. But the expected kiss didn't come. Some scalding breaths fell on my ear, accompanied by a low sneer. "Want me to kiss you? Not having touched you for a month, are you so desperate, Joanne?" I suddenly opened my eyes. Richard had already straightened up. A sarcastic smile escaped from his thin lips. Looking down at me, his eyes were only filled with indifference and disdain. At that moment, I felt all the blood in my body rush to my head. My hands and feet were cold and trembling. I sat there stiffly, staring blankly as he turned around and walked to one side. In the stunned silence of the whole room, he took the hand of that beautiful junior schoolmate. "Is it okay?" I knew that junior schoolmate had always been in love with him. She had expressed her feelings countless times, both openly and secretly. Before, when I was jealous, he casually said that he wasn't interested in her. But now, after the junior schoolmate blushed and nodded, he didn't hesitate to lower his head and kiss her. 2 minutes, not a second less. After the passionate kiss, he even raised his hand and rubbed the slightly swollen lips of the junior schoolmate. Wiped away the ambiguous water stains from the corner of her mouth. The several girls sitting beside me all looked at me with sadness and sympathy. Richard gave me a casual glance. Then he went back to his seat and picked up the wine bottle. "Why is it so quiet?" "It's quite interesting. Let's continue playing." Someone quickly tried to smooth things over. "Richard, you can't drink anymore. Look how drunk you are." "Yes, Richard. Joanne is almost crying. Hurry up and comfort her." Richard leaned back on the chair, looking laid back. "Why should I comfort her? She is your girlfriend after all. You were a bit too much just now." "Who said she was my girlfriend?" The sarcastic smile on Richard's lips grew even colder. "Didn't we break up a month ago?" I lowered my eyes and couldn't help but chuckle. "Joanne, are you okay?" The girl sitting beside me held my hand. I shook my head. "I'm fine. I'll go back first. You guys continue playing." I stood up and walked out. I heard the delicate voice of the junior schoolmate. "Is the senior sister angry?" "Ignore her." Richard asked someone to open another bottle of wine. "Keep drinking." "Richard, Joanne seems really angry this time." I didn't stop and directly opened the door. Richard's voice came lazily, "What does it have to do with me? Isn't she always really angry? In the end, she always comes back begging for reconciliation on her own. Do you still want to get back together with her?" The closed door blocked out all the sounds. I didn't hear his answer. But it didn't matter to me anymore. Previously, because of being in love with Richard, I chose to stay in China to take the postgraduate entrance examination. But now, it seems that going abroad to study is also a good choice. I spent some time cleaning up the things I left in Richard's apartment and took them back to the dormitory. I didn't tell anyone about going abroad to study for the time being. Life began to get busy, and there were so many things to prepare. Gradually, I seldom thought of Richard anymore. Until that day in the second cafeteria, I ran into him and a few friends after a long time. There was still a young and beautiful girl beside him. But it wasn't the junior schoolmate from last time. "Joanne, it's been a while. Let's have dinner together later." His friend greeted me with a smile. I just smiled politely. "No, I'm with my roommates." "Okay. By the way, there's a gathering at the old place tonight. You should come too." I subconsciously looked at Richard. His eyes were cold, and it was hard to tell what emotions were in his eyes. But he didn't interrupt his friend's words. My heart was calm without any ripples. I shook my head. "I won't go. I have other things to do tonight." "Why so much nonsense about having a meal?" Richard suddenly gave the few people a cold look, and he actually just turned around and left. His friend apologized to me a bit sheepishly. I waved my hand and also turned around and left. When I got back to the downstairs of the dormitory after having dinner, I ran into Richard and his new girlfriend again. The girl was hugging Richard's neck and asking for kisses by tiptoeing from time to time. But Richard's expression seemed a bit impatient. I walked straight ahead without looking sideways. Just as I was about to enter the dormitory gate, Richard suddenly called out to me, "Joanne." My steps paused for a moment but didn't stop. Richard called out again, "Joanne, I'm calling you. Didn't you hear?" He pushed away the girl in front of him and walked directly up to me. "Yes?" I looked at him calmly. "There's something." "Okay, tell me." Richard's little girlfriend followed and clung to him, looking at me with full hostility in her eyes. "Which bakery was the cake you always bought for me from?" Richard lazily put his arm around his girlfriend and looked down at me. "My girlfriend also likes cakes very much. I want to buy it for her. I made it myself." My gaze remained calm. "If she wants to eat it, I can send her the recipe." Richard frowned. "Don't bother." "Well, you make two for me." "Of course, I'll pay you." I smiled. "Sorry, I don't have time now." "Is it that you don't have time or you don't want to?" Richard looked at me with a half smile. "Are you jealous?" I suddenly felt it was so boring. I didn't want to argue or waste my breath on these silly things. "Think whatever you want." I walked around him and quickly entered the dormitory building. As soon as I entered the dormitory, my roommate pulled me to the window. Downstairs, Richard and his new girlfriend seemed to be having an argument. After a while, he impatiently shook off the girl's hand and drove away directly. The girl stood downstairs crying for a while and then left dejectedly. My roommate still seemed to have something more to say. "Joanne, I feel that Richard still likes you in his heart. Is he deliberately trying to make you angry so that you'll be the first to bow your head and give in?" I smiled and poked my roommate on the forehead. "Read fewer domineering CEO novels. You'll ruin your brain, honey." Because I liked Richard, I had clearly refused the marriage arrangement made by my elders before. Now that they learned that I was going abroad, they brought it up again. "Uncle, can I think about it a bit more?" "All right. You still want to continue studying for now, and there's no rush for the marriage thing. Let's meet before you go abroad. After all, it has to be someone you like." "Okay." I didn't refuse their kindness again. My two uncles doted on me very much. After my mother passed away and my father remarried, they were the people who loved me the most in the world. In the evening, I made an appointment to have dinner with my best girlfriend. I also told her about going abroad to study. When I went to the bathroom halfway through, Richard called me. Joanne, where are your things? I've taken them back to the dormitory. Richard's voice didn't show any sign of happiness or anger. Since you've move them all out cleanly. My girlfriend is coming over tonight, and she's very unhappy to see your things. Sorry, please throw them away. Sure, I'll throw them away. Don't regret it. I hung up the phone. I looked at myself in the mirror, a bit at a loss. I couldn't figure out what he meant. I didn't even want him anymore, so why would I care about the things he gave me? I promised my uncle that I would meet that person once before going abroad. But I never expected that the person who showed up as promised would be someone I should call little uncle. My girlfriend was also dumbfounded. She grabbed my hand and whispered with a small scream, Joanne, the person you're on a blind date with is Apollo. I subconsciously sat up straight, but my face flushed slightly. I didn't know it was him either. I can't take it anymore, Joanne. I'm scared. I need to escape to the bathroom. After saying that, my girlfriend let go of my hand. Before Apollo even got close, she sprang up, Uncle Apollo, I'll go to the bathroom first. After saying that, she bowed very cutely. But after just a few steps, she disappeared like a rabbit. Little uncle. I greeted him in a low voice. Suddenly, I didn't dare to look him straight in the eye like I used to. Apollo sat down opposite me. What would you like to eat? Anything is fine. I'm not picky. Apollo ordered a few dishes and asked me, is this okay? Looking at the menu, they were all things I usually like to eat. I was a bit surprised and couldn't help but look at him. In my memory, he was a man who was noble, cold, and full of the aura of a superior. Today, his clothes were a bit more casual, so he didn't seem as intimidating. But I was still a bit reserved and replied softly, it's okay. After the waiter took the menu and left, Apollo suddenly said, Joanne, are you afraid of me? I subconsciously nodded, and then quickly and flusteredly shook my head. In the past, when I saw him, I was just following my uncles. I only took a quick look from a distance. Occasionally, when the elders were talking, I just stood obediently on the side and never interrupted. He wasn't really that old. He was just of a higher generation. Actually, he was only 27 years old this year. So, what do you think of me? I was a bit stunned. Apollo just smiled, don't be nervous. You can think about it before answering. I took a deep breath. Little uncle. Joanne, you can call me by my name. I pinched my palm tightly. After a while, I finally called out softly, Apollo. I still have to go abroad to study for at least 2 years. It doesn't matter. If you're willing, we can get engaged first. Why? I was a bit puzzled. He had so many choices when it came to marriage. And I was just an orphan girl whose mother died early and whose father remarried, with no real home to speak of. Apollo handed me the poured juice. His fingers were long and his knuckles were strong. Lying on the glass, they looked like jade tubes. I was actually a bit stunned looking at them. He put down the glass and gently stroked the top of my head. Joanne, I don't want to scare you. Eso, letesh kipita secret. 3 days before going abroad, Apollo and I got engaged in a low-key manner. One day before going abroad, Richard suddenly called me. Joanne, tomorrow is my birthday. While I was packing my suitcase, I replied perfunctorily, You know the place? Richard's tone still carried a bit of laziness. I've given you the chance. It's up to you whether you take it or not. Before I could even react, the phone was hung up. My uncle came to knock on the door. Joanne, Mr. Apollo has come to pick you up for dinner. I quickly replied and closed the suitcase. That call from Richard just now had already been forgotten by me. Because I was going to have a long flight the next day, Apollo didn't send me home too late. He had a little wine during dinner. When I got out of the car, he suddenly gently grasped my wrist. Joanne. With a slight pull on my wrist by Apollo, I was pulled in front of him. He was wrapped in a rich aroma of wine. Being so close, the bitter scent of ebony and cedar instantly enveloped me. Different from Richard, who was a proud and arrogant playboy, Apollo had a completely different unique smell that belonged only to mature men. I was momentarily bewitched. Until Apollo lowered his head and a very light kiss landed on my lips. Get some rest early. Tomorrow I'll send you to the airport. As he said that, he reached out and gently rubbed my lips again. When I was both shy and at a loss, Apollo suddenly whispered in my ear, "Our Joanne really lives up to her name." At 7 o'clock in the evening, all the friends had arrived. There was an empty seat next to Richard. He didn't bring a female companion. The friends knew it clearly. That seat was reserved for Joanne. After all this fuss, they could actually all see that Richard still liked Joanne in his heart. He was just too proud and always wanted others to bow their heads first. After tonight, you two should stop messing around. Why bother? You've been looking so gloomy every day, as if we all owe you 8 million. When Joanne comes later, you should coax her nicely and apologize sincerely. Richard glanced casually at the door. I won't coax her. It's already good enough that I'm giving her a chance to step down. You're just being difficult. What time is it already? Why hasn't Joanne come yet? Did you tell her, Richard? Richard looked down at his watch. She can come if she wants to. I'll go out and have a look. Richard didn't stop anyone. He stood up and walked to the window. It was already getting dark outside. He looked down from the window. There were cars coming and going, but he didn't know if there was the one he was hoping for. Richard somehow remembered his birthday last year. At that time, his relationship with Joanne was just fine. She gave him a belt and cufflinks, and he used them almost every day. And the diamond studs he gave her on her birthday. She used to wear them every day too. But that day, she left them in the apartment and didn't take them away. For some reason, Richard's heart sank a bit. Just then, the door of the room was suddenly pushed open, and the person who came in shouted joyfully, "Richard, she's coming. She's coming." He suddenly turned around, feeling as if the haze that had been pressing on his heart instantly dissipated. He knew very well how much Joanne liked him. He just knew that she would definitely come tonight. As long as she came, this time he would take the initiative to bow his head and coax her. Richard leaned against the windowsill. He still had that laid-back and casual posture. As if he didn't care at all who the person coming in would be. And there wasn't a single ounce of expectation in his heart. But the arm resting on the windowsill was tensed up tightly. And his fingers were clenched one by one without him even realizing it. Super big surprise, it'll be here soon. The person who came in was full of excitement, and the atmosphere also became lively. There seemed to be a faint smile on Richard's lips. He lowered his eyes and said casually, "It's the same old routine every year. What kind of surprise could it be? This time it's really different." Richard didn't show much emotion on his face. But there were gradually ripples in his heart. What kind of surprise would Joanne give him? The friends were right. It was indeed his fault for going too far. He didn't know what had gotten into him that day. He actually kissed another girl right in front of her, but he regretted it right after kissing the junior schoolmate. If Joanne had shed a single tear at that time, he would have apologized and begged for peace immediately. But she didn't. She just left silently and quietly. He had been quite reckless during this period, constantly changing female companions. Joanne must have been really hurt in her heart. But even so, she still carefully prepared a birthday surprise for him. A thought suddenly popped up in Richard's mind. That's it. She's the one. He would put away his usually carefree and reckless nature and just have a good relationship with Joanne. A friend came over, bumped him gently, and whispered, "Don't be so proud anymore." Richard actually changed his previous arrogance and gave a light in response. The friend was a bit surprised. "You really know you're wrong?" Richard smiled. "I really do. My God, this is really a rare sight. The things I did before were really messed up." Richard said this, looking at his friend extremely seriously. "I've made up my mind. I'll settle down from now on. I'll be with Joanne properly and I won't make her angry anymore." The friend was full of relief. "It would have been so much better if you'd done this earlier. Joanne would be overjoyed. It's not too late now. As soon as Richard finished speaking, two waiters pushed a huge pink cardboard box tied with ribbons into the room. Richard was a bit stunned. The friend laughed and pushed him to go over. Hurry up and go open it to see what surprise Joanne has prepared for you. His heart was beating really fast. But for some reason, he felt a bit like being close to home but feeling timid. He was also a playboy who had been around in the party scene. He had seen all kinds of scenes. But at this moment, he was so nervous that his palms were sweating. Would Joanne be inside? So, the surprise she prepared was to give herself to him? Richard was thinking all kinds of things in his mind. He and Joanne had been dating for more than 2 years. When she was preparing to take the postgraduate entrance examination this year, she would sometimes stay overnight in his apartment outside the school because she studied too late. But they hadn't taken the final step. Actually, he had been dissatisfied about this before. Most of their Cold Wars were also because of this reason. He still remembered the time when they had the worst fight. Joanne cried extremely sadly. And he wasn't even willing to coax her. His mind was full of the dissatisfaction of not getting what he wanted. Only now did Richard belatedly realize that Joanne had no mother, and her father had remarried long ago, having a new family and children, and had been neglecting her. If he truly cared about her and loved her, he would have considered her insecurities. He should have given her a promise, a proper status, to put her at ease. Suddenly, Richard changed his mind. Why not do it tonight? He would propose to her, thinking like this in his heart, which had been beating violently before, suddenly calmed down. It seemed that deep in his heart, he had actually been waiting for the moment to make this decision all along. His friends surrounded him and pushed him to walk up to the huge pink cardboard box. He reached out and untied the bow made of silk ribbon. The lid of the cardboard box opened immediately, and as colorful heart-shaped balloons floated out, a girl wearing a pink strapped top and a skirt of the same color series also jumped up among the floating balloons and shouted cheerfully at him, "Richard, surprise!" A fragrant breeze blew over, and her soft and graceful body bounced into his arms, hugging his neck tightly. Then, she clung to him completely. Before Richard could even come to his senses, the girl gave him a hard kiss on the face. "Happy birthday, Richard!" Surprised? Unexpected? The girl looked up at him with her beautiful face, her eyes and face full of joy. Richard stood still. He just stared fixedly at the girl in his arms. For a moment, he was puzzled and dazed. When did Joanne become so active and enthusiastic? When did Joanne's face become so strange and, well, annoying? It took a full half a minute. Only then did he gradually come to his senses. When the girl was asking for a kiss again by tiptoeing, he suddenly raised his hand and pushed her away forcefully. "Richard!" The dazzling light fell on her face. On her ears. 2 diamonds sparkled with an extremely dazzling light, instantly stinging Richard's eyes. He took a step forward and grasped the girl's arm, and his handsome face even looked a bit distorted and hideous. "Who told you to wear these earrings? Who allowed you to wear them?" The girl was so scared that her face turned pale. "You said these things were an eyesore and told me to throw them away. But I thought they were so beautiful that I couldn't bear to throw them away. Take them off." The girl was still in a daze and hadn't reacted yet. Richard looked at her coldly, and the strength in his hand gradually increased. "Will you take them off yourself, or should I do it?" The whole room was as quiet as death, only the gradually uncontrollable sobbing of the girl could be heard. She took off the earrings with trembling hands and threw them at Richard. While crying, she shouted at him, "Richard, I want to break up with you." "Break up?" Richard clenched the pair of earrings tightly and laughed. "Did I ever date you? Did I ever say that you were my girlfriend?" The girl was stunned, and tears streamed down her face. "But you went on dates with me, took me home, you also kissed me and hugged me. So what?" Richard laughed cruelly. "I've kissed many girls. Are they all my girlfriends?" "Richard, you bastard." "That's right, I am a bastard. So, can you leave now?" Slowly, blood oozed from Richard's clenched hand. The earrings had pierced his palm, but he clenched them tightly and refused to let go. Joanne wouldn't come to celebrate his birthday anymore. And he, ridiculously, had been waiting for her to come. Waiting for her to give him a birthday surprise. The long flight finally ended. It was dusk when I arrived in the foreign country. And it should be around 3 or 4 in the morning in China at this time. As soon as I turned on my phone, a continuous stream of messages flooded in. It took a while for the phone to calm down. I casually clicked on them, and almost all of them were messages from Richard and reminders of missed calls. I frowned, feeling quite surprised. Richard had never been like this before. When we were in a Cold War before, if I didn't take the initiative to make up, but it was just to embarrass me in public. Now, when I think of what happened that night again, it seems as distant as if it were in a previous life. I smiled and put those unpleasant things behind me. Suddenly, the phone started vibrating and ringing again. It was still Richard's call. I didn't answer it, and he called again for the second time. I didn't have any deep hatred for Richard. The Richard family had close business dealings with my 2 uncles. I had never thought of cutting off all contact with Richard forever. It was just that we retreated to a plain relationship where we didn't bother each other. But it seemed that he didn't think so now. And I was already engaged. I should keep an appropriate sense of boundary with the opposite sex even more. I hung up the call and then deleted and blocked his number. A moment later, my friend's call came in. I still didn't answer it. My friend quickly sent a message, "Joanne, please answer the phone, okay? Yesterday was Richard's birthday. You didn't come, and he drank all night and is still getting in 4 drip in the hospital now. We can all see that he really regrets it this time. Joanne, just give him one more chance." I held my phone tightly. Not far away, the car arranged by Apollo to pick me up was waiting there. Thinking of the hug Apollo gave me when we parted, I felt a bit warm in my heart. He said that he would fly over to see me every month in the future. He also said that I should study with peace of mind, and he would wait patiently for me to finish my studies and return. He would never let me hear any gossip about him while I was abroad. Thinking of Apollo, there was always an inexplicable sense of security. There would be no more worrying about gains and losses. I thought about it and replied to my friend's message, "We have already broken up. Please don't tell me anything about him in the future. Thank you." After replying, I locked the screen and put the phone in my bag. The person arranged by Apollo came to help me with my luggage. The driver opened the car door for me and said respectfully, "Miss Joanne, Mr. Apollo has arranged everything. Now, let's send you home first." The car was driving on the streets of the foreign country. I looked at the street scenes outside the car with some curiosity. Everything was brand new and full of hope. Suddenly, I was full of expectations for the new life that was about to begin. After I replied to my friend's message that day, Richard never called or sent a text message again. And I also quickly forgot everything related to him. I threw myself wholeheartedly into the new study life. 1 month later, Apollo came to see me abroad as promised. Somehow, in just 1 month, when we met again, I was strangely shy. Clearly, when he sent me abroad, he hugged me and kissed me at the airport. But when I saw him again this time, I was so shy that I didn't dare to look up at him. Just before dinner was about to start, Apollo suddenly stood up and moved from the seat opposite me to the chair beside me. I instantly tensed up. I sat properly, with my back straight and my hands on my knees, like a well-behaved and obedient primary school student. "Joanne." Apollo gently held my hand. My palm was sweaty and damp. But Apollo held it tightly. "Why, after just 1 month, are you afraid of me again?" I couldn't answer. That strange and subtle feeling was indescribable. Should I change it to coming to see you twice a month in the future? I suddenly turned to look at him. Apollo, however, directly kissed me the moment I turned my face. "Joanne, I missed you a lot this month." As our lips and teeth intertwined, his voice was low yet a bit hoarse. I subconsciously tried to break free, but he clasped my waist, not allowing me to move around. The kiss wasn't very deep. Just like the previous few times, it didn't make me feel uncomfortable or offended. Instead, a sense of pleasure swelled in my heart, gradually making it hard for me to breathe. It felt like there was a small silver spoon in my heart, stirring the honey water with crushed ice. The sweetness seeped out bit by bit, spreading like ripples. I don't know when my hand tightly grasped the sleeve of his shirt, wrinkling it in various depths. It wasn't until the waiter came that Apollo stopped the kiss. My face was burning hot and must have been bright red. But in the subsequent interactions with Apollo, I no longer had the previous shyness and nervousness. Even once, after having a little red wine, I even mustered the courage to joke with him. "Apollo, I feel so comfortable and at ease with you." "How so?" I rested my chin on one hand and looked at him for a while, then suddenly burst out laughing. "Well, when I'm with you, it's like being with my uncles. I feel extremely relaxed and comfortable, as if I'm still a little kid." Apollo slightly raised his eyebrows. "You are a little kid. Joanne, at your age, you should be carefree and unrestrained." As he said that, he stroked the top of my head again. "In the future, just continue to be a little kid. At least, when you're in front of me, you can always be like this." "Why?" I looked at him a bit blankly and asked that question again. Why me? Why did he want to get engaged to me? Why was he being so nice to me? After my mother passed away, I understood a truth. In this world, many people put their interests first. No matter what they do, they first consider whether it's beneficial to themselves. But I carefully calculated in my heart. Apart from the inheritance my mother left me, there was nothing about me that was worth others plotting for. And this inheritance was nothing compared to Apollo. "Joanne, I'll tell you on our wedding day." Apollo kissed my brow and helped me put on my scarf. "Joanne, you're drunk. Let's go home." "Okay, Apollo, let's go home." 15 On the third day after Apollo returned to China, I had just come out of the school library when I saw Richard. The morning mist had dissipated, and the sun was hanging in the sky, but it was still cold. Wearing a coat and a scarf, I still felt the chill everywhere. But Richard was standing under a tree, only wearing a thin windbreaker. He seemed to have lost some weight. Perhaps due to the long flight, he also looked a bit haggard. However, he was still outstanding and dazzling. Even on the unfamiliar campus in a foreign country, he still attracted the attention of passers-by. I paused my steps, hugged my books, and continued walking forward. When I walked past him, I didn't look up or at him. But Richard called out to me. "Joanne." He took a step forward and blocked my way. I don't know how long he had been standing there. The mist had dampened his hair and eyes. "I've been looking for you for a long time." I smiled. "Is there something? Why did you suddenly decide to study abroad? Why didn't you even tell me?" "If it's because of what happened during the dare that day, Joanne, I can apologize to you." Richard grasped my arm. I stepped back and pulled my hand away. "It's all in the past. And I really don't care anymore." Richard slightly frowned. "Then why did you go abroad to study?" "It's my own choice." He looked at me, his frown deepening. "All right, the fact that you've gone abroad can't be changed. At most, I'll just fly over to see you more often in the future." I was a bit surprised. "Fly over more often? I'm a man, of course I'll be the one to fly over to see you with effort." "Wait." I interrupted him. "Richard, you don't need to fly over to see me. You have no obligation to, and I don't need it either." "Joanne, so, are you still angry? Why did you say it was all in the past just now?" I was almost laughed out of anger. "Richard, how much clearer do you want me to be?" "I said it was all in the past because I don't care about that incident anymore, nor do I care about you anymore, understand?" "What do you mean?" "We broke up a long time ago." I looked at him calmly. "Richard, do you understand now?" 16 I don't know if Richard is too conceited and proud, or if I didn't make myself clear enough. He didn't go back to China but instead waited for me at school every day. At first, I ignored him completely and treated him like air. But in less than 2 days, rumors started spreading in the school. Many people were saying that I had a very handsome Eastern boyfriend. I was afraid that if the matter spread and got out of hand and reached Apollo, it would make him unhappy. After careful consideration, I still decided to have a proper talk with Richard. But before I could even open my mouth, Richard took out a ring. "Joanne, I know what's on your mind. Isn't it just that you want to get married and have a sense of security?" He grasped my hand, trying to put the ring on my finger. "Let's get engaged first. You can get the marriage certificate whenever you want. Is this okay?" I pulled my hand back forcefully, and the ring fell onto the table. The diamond was big and shiny. I don't deny that when I liked him the most, I had fantasized about this day. But after one cold war after another, one argument after another about whether to have sex, and getting jealous and sad because of other girls again and again, and finally, seeing him kiss that junior schoolmate with my own eyes, my liking and expectation for him had long disappeared. "Richard, I came here just to tell you again. I've broken up with you. Go back and don't come looking for me again." Richard seemed to get angry all of a sudden. "Joanne, you've been making a fuss for so long. It's about time. What you don't want to do, I won't force you to do in the future. If you want to get married, I'll agree. What else do you want?" "Richard, I'm already engaged." I looked at him extremely calmly. "So, please stop pestering me, okay?" Richard stared at me for a while and then suddenly laughed. "Stop joking, Joanne. Who did you get engaged to? Who could you get engaged to? We just had a few fights and a couple of days of Cold War, and you just got engaged to someone casually?" Richard looked at me. "When did you become so casual? Believe it or not, I've made everything clear that should be said. If you continue to pester me at school, I'll call the police." After saying that, I picked up my bag and was about to turn around and leave. Richard grasped my wrist. "Joanne, then tell me, who did you get engaged to?" He exerted force with his hand, and I was dragged by him and staggered a bit. "How can you say that after dating me for 2 years, even if we broke up, you found someone else so quickly? I should at least check him out for you, shouldn't I?" "It's not necessary." "Is it not necessary, or is there really no one?" "All right, you've learned all the tricks I used before. Do you want to make me jealous? I really think he's sick, and seriously ill." "Richard, I'm not as boring as you." "Then tell me about your fiancé. Do you really want to know?" "Of course. My ex-girlfriend is engaged. How could I not be curious?" I pointed to a business magazine on the newspaper rack not far away. The person on the cover was Apollo. "It's him." Richard looked in the direction I pointed and then laughed. "Joanne, you could at least make up something more believable. That's Apollo. Even my father has to show deference to him. I've told you, it's him. Believe it or not." Richard's brows relaxed, and the smile on his lips grew deeper. "Come on, stop joking with me, Joanne. Let's make up and be like we used to, okay?" I looked at him a bit helplessly, feeling that it would be even more ridiculous to explain further. So I simply stopped talking and turned around to walk out. Richard was about to chase after me. But suddenly his cell phone rang. After just a few words, his expression changed, and he hurriedly got into his car and left. I didn't know why, but I was greatly relieved. After Richard left, those rumors quickly disappeared without a trace. Apollo talked to me on the phone and via video as usual, without any difference from before. Only then did I completely relax. It seemed that these jokes hadn't reached his ears. 17 months passed by. Apollo maintained the rhythm of flying over to see me twice a month without interruption, and Richard hadn't come to see me again since that time he came to find me. Only that he had called me once using a friend's cell phone in between. But every time I heard his voice, I just hung up directly. When spring came, my birthday was approaching. Because I missed my two uncles very much, I went back to China with Apollo. At the family banquet that day, Apollo suddenly brought up the matter of getting the marriage certificate with my uncles. I was a bit surprised, but my uncles were all very happy. I didn't have any resistance in my heart either, and seemed to be quite happy too. The matter of getting the marriage certificate was set on my birthday. The wedding preparations also began to be arranged slowly. The night before getting the marriage certificate, I made an appointment to gather with my best girlfriends. Apollo said that I could have a wild night out with my good friends before getting married, but after getting the marriage certificate tomorrow, I wasn't allowed to stay out all night. When we were having dinner that night, we happened to meet some friends from Richard's circle. When I and my girlfriends went to that extremely popular internet-famous nightclub after dinner, as soon as we got out of the car, we saw Richard. He was standing by the car, looking at me without blinking. The wind in early spring in the capital was still very cold. I shrank my neck and tightened my coat. I walked straight past him without looking sideways and went inside. Richard didn't call out to me either. My girlfriends and I didn't really like this noisy place. So after staying for a while, we were ready to leave. We wanted to find a quiet club to drink tea and chat. But just as I stood up, Richard called out to me. "Joanne, since you're back, don't go back to France again." I was about to walk around him and leave. But Richard blocked my way again. "I didn't throw away these earrings." He opened his palm, and the diamond earrings were still shining brightly. When I received this birthday gift, I was extremely happy but also a bit disappointed, but I still wore them every day and never took them off. But when I decided to completely let go, I left these earrings in his apartment and didn't take them with me. I've thought a lot these days. It wasn't wrong of you not to want to have a sexual relationship before marriage. It wasn't wrong of you not to want to bow your head during the last Cold War. I shouldn't have deliberately provoked you and made you angry. But Joanne, the premise of all this is simply that I still like you and have you in my heart." Richard pointed to his tie and then showed me the cufflinks on his cuffs. "Look, I use the things you gave me every day. Joanne, we dated for 2 years, not 2 days or 2 months. I know you're reluctant in your heart, right?" I was really fed up with his words. And I knew it clearly. He was just too used to having everything go smoothly and being so high and mighty. There was never anything he wanted but couldn't get. Nor had he ever got something and then lost it. So he was just unwilling to let go and was stubbornly pestering me. To say that he liked and cared about me was really too cheap. But I'm going to get the marriage certificate tomorrow. Richard, you should also look forward. Joanne, you can be angry and get engaged on impulse. But marriage is not a small matter. Don't gamble with your whole life just because you're angry with me. I pushed his hand away forcefully. "Richard, you're not that important. You haven't been important for a long time." I looked at him seriously for the last time. "Richard, I won't joke about my lifelong event for someone who is no longer important." It seemed that it was the first time I saw such an expression on Richard's face. He was always high and mighty, with a lazy and relaxed attitude, not caring about anything. Even every time I cried and said I wanted to break up. At most, he just frowned and went to smoke irritably. But now he was standing there fixedly. Those usually flirtatious and amorous eyes seemed to have completely quieted down. But whether he was in pain or sad, and how long he would be sad and in pain, it had nothing to do with me anymore. On the day when I got the marriage certificate with Apollo, we went back to our wedding room together. Some things happened naturally and logically. My uncles all approved of my marriage with Apollo. And Apollo followed all the procedures carefully and rigorously according to the traditions. Because of his attention and care, my 2 uncles changed from being worried and uneasy at the beginning to finally accepting it with relief. It was also at that time that I learned. After my mother passed away and my father wanted to remarry. The reason why I inherited the inheritance so smoothly was also because of Apollo's help behind the scenes. Without him, it would have been a big hassle for my 2 uncles alone at that time. The heating in the house was on full blast. When Apollo was drying my hair for me, I don't know if it was because we were too close to each other or if the heating and the warm air were too hot. I had a thin layer of sweat on my back, and my face was gradually getting red and hot. "Apollo, can you tell me why now?" He turned off the hairdryer and leaned over to laugh in my ear. "I'll tell you after the wedding night." "Apollo." I glared at him through the mirror. "After the wedding night, it'll be too late if I want to regret it." "Do you still want to regret it?" "If you can't give me a satisfactory answer." My voice got smaller and smaller as I spoke. Because Apollo had already wrapped his arms around my waist from behind and kissed me deeply. This kiss was different from the gentle and restrained ones before. It was extremely powerful and surprisingly deep. I felt that all the oxygen in my body had been sucked out. My tongue was numb from being sucked, and my legs were so weak that I could hardly stand. Apollo simply picked me up and put me on the dressing table. He spread my legs apart and brushed aside the messy hair by my ears. When my earlobe was kissed, I trembled all over. There were small bumps on the back of my neck, like an electric shock. And it was held tightly by his warm big hand. "What do you want, Joanne? Want to break off the engagement? Or want to sneak away?" As he said that, he kissed the most sensitive spot on the side of my neck. I put my hands on his chest, wanting to dodge, but there was nowhere to hide. In the end, he kissed my slightly swollen lips again. "Do you remember I told you that I was afraid of scaring you?" "Yes," I mumbled in response, but as soon as I opened my mouth, he kissed me even deeper. I couldn't help but clench the robe on his chest, trembling all over. "The first time I saw you, you were only 16. 16 years old, my mother was still alive at that time." I stared blankly at him and suddenly my eyes turned red. He hugged me in his arms and stroked my back gently one by one. "You were still a minor at that time, so I could only wait. Later, when your mother passed away, you hadn't turned 18 yet. I remember now. I saw you at my mother's funeral too." I lay on his chest, tears streaming down my eyes continuously. "You told me to restrain my grief and not to cry myself sick. You grew up and became an adult, but the timing wasn't right." "Joanne, I still could only wait." Apollo cupped my face and wiped away the tears on my face bit by bit. Only then did I remember that in those years, my uncles did mention from time to time about arranging blind dates for me. But at that time, I had just lost my mother and was still young. I didn't have the slightest such thought at all. But I didn't expect that after going to university, you fell in love with another guy. I had some despicable and dirty thoughts of snatching you away. But seeing how happy you were beside him, I gave up that idea. For 2 whole years, Joanne, I had never suffered like this." Apollo looked down at me. His fingers caressed my eyebrows and eyes, every inch of my face. Until finally, they landed on the corners of my eyes where the tears were welling up. "Don't cry, Joanne." "Apollo, so you said you were afraid of scaring me. Is it because you liked me when I was 16? Apollo didn't answer. Actually, the truth was far from being that simple. But he couldn't bring himself to tell Joanne about those secret and unmentionable loves. She had entered his dreams countless times. And in those dreams, he had done many excessive things to her. But now, the dreams had come true. She was truly in his arms. Yes, I used to despise myself for being so despicable. I even privately consulted a psychologist. But it's normal for teenagers to fall in love secretly when they first experience romantic feelings, right? But I'm 6 years older than you, Joanne. At her age, she might have only fantasized about pure love. But at his age, he already had an extremely strong possessive desire for the girl he liked. I looked at him a bit worriedly. "That's true. You're 6 years older than me. My best friend said that men start to go downhill after the age of 25, and you're already 28. But before I could finish this sentence, Apollo suddenly picked me up. In a dizzying whirl, my body sank into the soft big bed and was then enveloped and swallowed by his strong and hot body. "Joanne, what you hear may be false, but what you see is real. Why don't you take a look, touch, and feel for yourself before making a conclusion?" He held my hand and moved it downwards. I suddenly opened my eyes wide and stared at him in astonishment. "Apollo." He seemed to be amused by my expression. "What about a 28-year-old man?" I wanted to pull my hand back, but he pressed it even tighter. He leaned down, and a hot kiss landed on my lips again. "Joanne, don't cry later. Even if you cry, I won't be soft-hearted." But he still softened his heart towards me. Just like that year at my mother's funeral. I was crying my eyes out, and it completely softened his heart. And now, I just shed a single tear with red eyes under him. He stopped and held me in his arms, coaxing me for a long, long time. That night was very, very long, as if the day would never break. But the next day's daytime was very, very short. Because when I opened my eyes, it was already afternoon. And the moment I opened my eyes, Apollo bent down and kissed me. "It's time to get up. If you don't, your 2 uncles won't be happy." I smiled with my eyes closed and reached out to him for a hug. He bent down and picked me up. Our Joanne is really just like her name, soft and gentle. Do you like it? I mustered the courage to look at him, but then I was the first to back down and buried my face in his chest. Apollo carried me steadily towards the bathroom. After a while, he answered. Yes. Very much. Always liked it. Liked it for a long, long time. When I was completely unaware. When I was either in pain or happy. There was also someone who cared about my joys and sorrows. I don't know what the future will be like. But at this moment, this instant, I just feel extremely happy and satisfied. On the day of my wedding with Apollo, Richard's parents came. But Richard didn't. When I saw Richard's parents, there was a bit of awkwardness between us. But I didn't involve the grudges between Richard and me with the elders. After all, when we were dating back then, they were quite polite to me, even though I knew they weren't quite satisfied with me. But Apollo's attitude was a bit cold. So they looked a bit uneasy. Richard had said before that his father had to show deference to Apollo. Indeed, the Richard family wasn't as prosperous as before. Now it was even on the decline. If they offended Apollo, they might fall even further in the future. Looking at Richard's mother's uneasy and flustered eyes, I remembered that when my mother passed away, she also came to pay her respects. She also lovingly took me into her arms and shed tears. I couldn't help but gently tug at Apollo's sleeve. Only then did he ease his expression a bit and had someone accept the congratulatory gift sent by the two elders. When I was changing my wedding dress midway, I received a text message from an unknown number on my phone. Joanne, happy wedding. I knew it was Richard. After thinking for a while, I still replied with 2 words, thanks. After a while, that number sent another message. If I had kissed you during that dare that day, would we not have separated? I didn't reply again and deleted and blocked that unknown number. There are no ifs in this world. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't have been so disheartened to decide to go abroad, to agree to meet Apollo as arranged by my uncles. I also wouldn't have known that being loved wholeheartedly by someone is like this. Joanne, are you done changing? Apollo pushed the door open and came in. I turned around to look at him, with a smile as beautiful as a flower. Yes.